Alrighty, let's try this again. So, I guess my mic wasn't working, and you know, I did go through an update today of Windows, and so there was a distinct possibility that the update did something, and if that's the case, I'm really sorry. Looks like it's working now. You guys are going to have to let me know as far as audio levels and so forth, because I had to kind of, you know, change some things. But that said, it looks like everything's working okay here. I believe. Okay, so I tested the audio and it seemed to sound okay when recording, so we'll see as far as the live stream's concerned. And I appreciate everybody's patience. Today we're going to be talking about a slightly different subject than I had originally planned. I had originally planned on doing something related to astrology and the tarot, as far as taking a natal wheel and doing a chart for somebody and looking at the different houses with respect to the placement within the spread, right? The positional meaning, so to speak, of the different houses, and looking at the tarot and how it ties into that, right? So I'd considered doing something related to the technique, right? There's a few different ways to go about that. One of the ways is to use the sign and planet combination to use the appropriate decan of that period. Another way is to sort of lay the majors out appropriate to each house, and then you know, read the individual cards that way. There's a lot of different ways to go about it, and sort of depending upon what it is that you're reading about, you know, the goal of the work kind of determines the best method, right? And so that's at least how I go about it. But then yesterday in the stream, somebody had mentioned something kind of toward the end of the night. And they said, hey, Michael, why don't you talk about Lilith sometime? And I thought, Lilith, wow, that's an interesting subject, right? And so I just mentioned offhand, okay, yeah, Lilith, you know, Qliphoth and these things. And, you know, and then it dawned on me today. So much of what I'm trying to do here on the channel is to maintain the integrity of the work. And that's one of the reasons that I approach it from the way that I do, that, you know, we play with our toys, right? And we have fun with our Gematria and our Notarikon and these things, and we have fun with our sigils and our circles and so forth, and definitely have fun connecting the different stories, right? Missy, how's it going? Thank you for popping in. My mic wasn't working, right? So I had to fix that and come back on. And so that's always fun too, right? Going through the different bodies of knowledge and making that connection. And that's one of the things that I'm going to do today, because if a fact is true, then you can see it elsewhere. It reflects its truth in different places. And so let's talk about Lilith. Does she appear in, say, Zohar? Does she appear in the I Ching? Does she appear, because we know the I Ching is definitely tells the truth. It speaks the story. So does Zohar, so it must be in both. And if not, well, spoiler, it's in there. We're going to be looking at it with respect to a lot of different places. Apocrypha, we're going to be looking at her with respect to some places that she's appeared in poetry, so we can kind of gain an insight there. And then obviously tie the whole thing together with respect to the tarot and what all that means. How do we apply it in our lives? When we're telling that story, where does she fall, right? I keep saying that, you know, the divine algorithm is every two has a third, every opposite has a third, right? Well, we're going to talk about that today. And so Lilith is a really, really fun subject. One of the reasons is that it's so misunderstood. She is a very, very prominent figure in the story of creation and in the story of Kabbalah, the tree, and these kinds of things. And so I thought it might be good to sort of start at the end and then circle back and get there, right? And by doing that, we can really get an insight of who she is and why she's so important to our lives, right? And so, you know, I threw some numbers together, and we're going to take a look at those numbers, because, you know, again, Gematria can be a very powerful tool when we're trying to investigate a subject. It gives us access from a totally different lens than we're used to talking about. Very typically when we approach subjects like this, what we're doing is we're using the vocabulary we know, and most of the time unconsciously. So by applying things like, say, Gematria, the real benefit is kind of forcing yourself to see the idea from a different perspective. It's kind of the idea of having a meeting in the conference room and leaving that one chair open, right? It's that same concept, it forces you to kind of look at it from a different perspective. And in that work, you can really get to the heart of the context and find that third. And so one of the places that I think is best to start with is this idea of the descent, right? And what that's all about. Because what we're discussing here at the end of the day is the idea of this individual and who she actually really is in our lives. She appears in many, many different places in the world. And one of the most important places that she appears, unbeknownst to many, is in a very important doctrine that we're all familiar with. If we call the tarot the pictorial representation of the Kabbalistic tree of life, which is ultimately the story of our creation, the redemption story, if you want to lie about it, then what we're actually talking about when we look at somebody like a Lilith is we're talking about the other side. The other side is actually a term that's used when discussing this particular place. It's called the Sitra Akra in Hebrew, and that means other side. And what is that other side? The other side is basically the other tree. You see, every two has a three. And so what does that mean? If every two has a three, that means that when we were originally in that place, God said there's these two trees. There's the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And eat from the tree of life, but never eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And then there's that whole thing. We'll talk about it in a minute, right? But let's take a look at the rule. Let's apply the algorithm. Every two has a third. So the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil are really two sides of the same coin. But there's a third. The tree of death. Really, ultimately, what it is what is the idea of knowledge of good and evil? Well, it's that one tree is two. And ultimately, it's the idea, and if you, again, I'm not here to teach Kabbalah, how dare I. What I'm here to do is provide my perspective on stories. If you investigate the Kabbalah further, you'll notice that there's four worlds, and there's this idea of the name, the ineffable name, and feel free, please, I encourage you to investigate that further. Israel Regardie is an excellent source for that information. Milo DuQuette, Chicken Kabbalah, Son of Chicken Kabbalah, anything he's ever written, but those two in particular. But there's a lot of good resources with respect to that, and so I'm going to leave that for you to. What I'm talking about here is the idea of, how's it going? Good to see you. Shushu's in the house, we can begin. There's this idea that every two has a third, and if we're talking about the tree of life and the tree of knowledge, what's that third? Well, that third is the tree of death. And it's depicted in this idea of the reverse tree. But now this is really the false story, because the ultimate story that we're really talking about is by combining these two trees together, by it being upside down the way it's supposed to be, the lower world, and the upper as well, right? And what do we have? We have Lilith and Adam. So when we see the original story, what we're told and what we're thinking is Adam and Eve. But prior to that, maybe, I don't know, we'll investigate that tonight. I have some books we're going to look into, one of them being the Bible. Genesis 2:22. 2:22. That's a cool number. Also 127. We're going to look at that as well. Zucano, how's it going? I haven't seen your name in my chat for a while. We're going to talk about that, actually. So we're going to investigate this idea. Does she appear? When does she appear? Because I believe, based on what I'm going to present tonight, that she was created long before Eve, and potentially before Adam was even physically manifest. She and Adam were created at the same time. That's what I'm getting at. Very much in the way that when an emotion is created, the space that it occupies is created at the same time. That said, when we consider the combination of these two things and what we're really talking about, and I'll change the color here to maybe give it a different kind of perspective, like a black and white perspective, but the same idea of what we're actually talking about here. And so that is the beginning, which I'm going to circle back to in just a little bit, okay? And what that's going to do is maybe give us a jumping off point that we can now explore and interrogate this information with new eyes. Because isn't that the point? The goal here is to use these new eyes that we have to tell this story more appropriately, so that we're able to say, okay, well, I've heard this before, and then we can find it everywhere. So the first place I want to look is the source, right? I mean, if we're talking about this kind of Judeo-Christian idea, let's just go to creation in the Bible first. There's two quotes I want to talk to. The first one is Genesis 2:22. If you have a Bible, grab it. If you don't worry, I have mine. And what we're talking about in Genesis is, the word is the idea of the creation, right? It's the creation of man, it's the creation of the universe and all these things, and, God spoke the word and whatever. But we're going to look at some other things here. One of the things that we're going to be looking at is the idea of when Adam happened. And more specifically, that some things happened around and before that, right? And so let's take a look. Genesis chapter 2, verse 22. Then the rib which the Lord God had taken from man, he made into a woman. And he brought her to the man. And Adam said, This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called a woman, because she was taken out of man. Therefore a man shall leave his father and woman and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Okay, fine. So that's Eve. I'm talking about Eve, right? I'm talking about Eve now. This Bible is a very, very precious gift from somebody who gave this to me. And there's some highlighting around the book, and it's interesting what he highlighted. So this is a long time ago, 10, 12 years ago, something. But then the next verse that I think points to the creation of Lilith prior to Eve is way back several pages in chapter 1, verse 27, which he actually had highlighted, probably for a different reason, knowing him. But let's go ahead and read this. What we're talking about is the creation and on the days, and so each day God did something else. And there was a point that he made God, or God made man in his image, and that's verse 26. Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. So anyway, now let's get to 27 here. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. So essentially, when God created man, right? God created man. Okay, yeah, I see that. Male and female, he created them. So he made a man and a woman. But Eve doesn't exist yet, because Eve didn't come from this process. Eve came from a rib of Adam. Adam and Eve are twins. Adam and Lilith are not. It's a different idea. And so let's just review this again here. There's a point as well that talks about creating the life and the waters and the sea and the birds in the air and these types of things, right? And it speaks about be fruitful, multiply, fill the waters, and let the birds multiply, right? And so we have this idea of, the air and the water and on the fifth day, right? But now here then we have the idea of the creation of Adam. But now also at the same time we have the creation of something else here. We have male and female. He created them. And then it says, be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds in the air. Okay, so then he rested. He's done with creation. Creation's done. But Eve doesn't exist yet. Right? Again, Eve doesn't show up till, there we go. Right. And this is where we're at 2:22. So if you want to read that portion, go to Genesis 2, verse 22, and this is where we get into the idea. Let's back up to 21. And the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall onto Adam, and he slept. And he took one of the ribs and closed up the flesh in the place, and that rib which the Lord God had taken from man, he made into a woman, and he brought her to the man. And Adam said, this is now bone of my bone, the flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. There's Eve. And they were both naked, and man and wife, and they were not ashamed, right? And then we get the temptation, and I've spoken about that many times. But so, just to be clear, 2:22 is where Eve is born. 1:27, the creation of Adam, is the creation of Lilith. So God created man in his own image, man being the colloquial, being the plural, and then image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Anyway, so that's Genesis 1:27. Okay, interesting. There's a few other things that I want to read with respect to that particular circumstance here. There's an interesting text. It's an apocryphal text. It's quite old. One of the nicknames is called the alphabet text. I love that. But basically, it's the idea here that God creates Adam. He's quote unquote, and there's this idea that Adam should not be alone. There's this desire for Adam to have someone to share it with. And there was a creation of a woman. Now it says, he called her Lilith, and Adam and Lilith immediately began to fight. She said, I will not lie below you. I will not lie beneath you. If you are fit only to be in the bottom position, I will be the superior one. And she said, well, we're equal to each other. We were both created from the earth, but this is that he wouldn't listen. And when she saw this, she pronounced the ineffable name and flew away into the air. So just to be clear, Adam and Eve right away had a fight because Adam was like, hey, wait a minute. Well, you're the object of my desire. You're the cup that I'm supposed to fill, right? And his compulsion was sort of just singular in that circumstance, right? He didn't get it. And she's like, no, we're equals here. We're supposed to give and take. My sword into cup, your sword into cup. We're equals. There's none of this, on top nonsense. And so then Adam says to God, he says, sovereign Lord of the universe, the woman you gave me ran away. At once the Holy One, blessed be he, sent the three angels, Senoi, Sansonoi, and Semangaloth, to go get her back, to go find her. And so the Holy One said to Adam, if she agrees to come back, what I made is good. But if not, she must permit 100 of her children to die every day. And the angels left God and went looking for her, who they found in the ocean, the mighty waters, where the children are drowned daily. And they told her God's word, but she didn't want to return. And the angel said, well, then we will drown you in the sea. And she said, leave me. I was created only to cause sickness to infants. If the infant is male, I have dominion over him for 8 days after his birth, and a female for 20 days. What's a month? 30. 30 minus 8, 22. Okay, but what about 20? 30 minus 20 is 10, right? So we have the signs, the planets and the signs, and we have the deacons, each one being 3 deacons for the period, which are the 3 angels. Anyways, when the angel heard Lilith's words, they insisted she go back, but she swore to them by the name of the living and eternal God. This is the biggie, perk up. Whenever I see you or your names or your forms in an amulet, I will have no power over that infant. And so she agreed to have 100 of her children die every day. Accordingly, every day 100 demons perished, and for the same reason we write the angels' names on the amulets of young children. When Lilith sees their names, she remembers her oath, and the child recovers. Interesting story. Remember, take this in emotionally first, and we'll look at it in the mind later. This is another interesting perspective, and this is a little closer to the truth that we're going to be speaking about tonight. It's called the first light. Lilith was one of the first creations when light happened. Adam and Eve met each other later. Eve was created after creation. She was the first transformation. A piece of Adam was taken and made into something else, but Adam and Lilith were created at the same moment. Okay? And so, just consider that. Lilith was made with the creation of the luminaries. The first light, which is the light of mercy, the light of the Sephiroth, the spheres on the tree, appeared on the first day of creation when God said, let there be light. This light became hidden, and the holiness became surrounded by a husk of evil. It's called the Qliphoth. The Qliphoth. Was created around the brain. This husk was created around the brain. And it spread and brought out other husks. And that husk is Lilith. She is the thing that prevents us from seeing. But she is embodied in that. She is that. She is unable to see. She wants nothing more than the ability to create, and that gift was given to Eve. Lilith wants to create, but is unable. She's blocked. She's in a constant state of wanting to bestow, but being unable. Where have I heard that before? Lament. She's being rejected. Okay, here's another example of this circumstance. All right. Lilith emerges as a divine entity that was born spontaneously out of the supernal abyss, out of the power of an aspect of God. The Gevurah of Din, again, you may bump into that if you follow the path of Kabbalah. This aspect of God was negative and punitive, as well as one of the 10 attributes of the Sephiroth at its lowest manifestation, and has an affinity with the realm of evil. And it is out of this that Lilith emerged and became one with Samael, the dark Adam. When she fell, and when Eve was created, Samael was created, and then Lilith and Samael become one. And then what essentially that is the play of that dynamic in the lower world is the idea of the 7 emanations of the tree of death, the lower tree, the dark reflection, right? The other side. Goethe, Faust. What a great little conversation. I'm just going to read you a little tiny scene from Faust. Faust is having a conversation with Mephistopheles. And what is Mephistopheles but the personification of the devil, right, of Lucifer. And so really he has this idea of wanting to convince Faust of something. And this is the conversation that they're having. So Faust says, "Who is that there?" And Mephistopheles says, "Take a good look, Lilith." And Faust says, "Lilith, who is that?" Mephistopheles says, "It's Adam's wife, his first. Beware of her. Her beauty's one boast is her dangerous hair. When Lilith's wind is tight around a young man, she doesn't soon let go of them again." After this warning, Faust quietly and ironically encourages the dance. So Mephistopheles says, "Hey, maybe you should have a dance with the pretty witch." And Faust and Lilith engage in a kind of little conversation where they recount the days that they spent in Eden. And here's Faust dancing with the young witch. "A lovely dream I dreamt one day. I saw a green-leafed apple tree. 2 apples swayed upon a stem, so tempting I climbed up for them." The pretty witch: "Ever since the days of Eden, apples have been man's desire. How overjoyed I am to think, sir, apples grow too in my garden." Just, you know, it's all there. Okay, this is one last little component of this that we're going to look at from the respect of mythology and folklore. This is accordance with the Jewish folk tradition. Lilith is looked at as both having long hair and this idea of a dangerous feminine seduction, right? And she possesses women through mirrors, right? The Victorian poet Robert Browning re-envisioned Lilith in a poem called Adam, Lilith, and Eve. First published in 1883, this poem depicts the traditional myth surrounding the triad of Adam, Eve, and Lilith. Lilith and Eve are being friendly and complicious with each other as they sit together by either side of Adam, and under the threat of death, Eve admits that she never loved Adam, while Lilith confesses that she always loved him. And here's the poem. "As the worst of the venom left my lips, I thought, if despite this lie he strips the mask from my soul with a kiss, I crawl, his slave, soul, body, and all." Isn't that beautiful? If, despite this lie, he strips the mask of my soul with a kiss, I crawl. So she's sort of saying, I'll put him to the test, and if he sees the truth, then he will know me. And that was Lilith. Right? And so now there's some truth in that. You can see it all over the place if you're familiar with the story, right? And at the end of the day, that story, if it's true, should be able to be seen elsewhere. And so let's look at, for instance, just for the heck of it, there's a hexagram that popped to my mind pretty quick on this. It's number 44. And you tell me if this sounds like Lilith. This is the Book of Changes and the Unchanging Truth. Watching Ni, which is a beautiful translation. This individual knows what they're talking about. They come from a lineage of, just to say, mastery in the subject. And so we're talking about number 44. It's called The Encounter. Meeting together. Encounter. It is like an overly strong woman who has difficulty in being a good wife. Do not marry such a woman. Heaven is above the wind. The blowing wind touches everything in its course, thus there is an encounter. The situation appears to be smooth. The image suggests that everything will go on as one wishes. However, hidden danger approaches in the form of a forward yin line below. Negative force has begun to grow again as yang energy has reached its fullest strength. One should be careful of this situation and heed the warning of this hexagram. And what is the hexagram actually warning us of? Right? The idea here is the idea of when you are at the top of the wheel, i.e. in your fullest, strongest state, you're on your way down. And at the bottom is this dominant feminine energy that they're talking about. But I mean, come on, tell me that isn't exactly what we're referring to all over the place, right? That divine feminine is all over the place. You just have to look for it. And more importantly, divine feminine seems to be more than just this divine mother, this Eve energy, right? And I'm just going to read it again now, and let's kind of stop and provide some commentary here. Well, we already talked about an overly strong woman who has difficulty in being a good wife because she recognized, no, there's an equality here. This is a give and a take 100%. There is no top or bottom. Heaven is above the wind. What is wind? Air. Mind. It's kind of the idea of the opposite of where we are, which is instead of us having our head in the world, it's having your head in heaven, and there's no balance there either. It's the opposite, right? The situation appears to be smooth. The image suggests that everything will go on as one wishes. However, hidden danger approaches in the form of a forward yin line below. Negative forces have begun to grow again as yang energy has reached its fullest strength, which means it's going to start to fall, and so it's no longer going to be at the top soon. One should be careful. Okay, and so you get the idea here. And there's other wisdom in the particular circumstance of the changing lines and some other ideas of the commentary, right? The untrue mind. And it's a very interesting story as well that I might read at some point in the future. But you'll notice that the 44th hexagram is absolutely Lilith. And we always think that Adam and Eve are it, but don't forget, every two has a third, and that third is Lilith. Adam and Eve are the two, the third is Lilith, right? And so, interesting. This is Zohar. And now, at the beginning of the segment here, I mentioned there's a couple of different names for this, right? Like the Qliphoth, the Qliphoth. But we're talking about here, the dark tree is called the Sitra Akra. And what the Sitra Akra is the other side, right? And so now, a lot of the Zohar is in the form of a dialogue. Okay, and so now this is the question and the answer, and we're just going to go over a couple quick things here and see if you can hear what we're talking about. Okay, so the question. If Earth is called Akra, when I should read Akra, he answers, because Akra is one of the 7 lands below, where the sons of Cain's sons reside. Indeed, after being banished from the face of the earth, they descended there and fathered generations. Wisdom became so lost that all understanding was lost. This is a double land, consisting of darkness and light. And so what we're referring to here is the idea that there isn't one tree, there's 2 trees. And the lower world tree, the manifest world tree, is actually 2 trees. And what we're talking about here is this idea of these 2 trees being what we're actually speaking about. Okay. And these 2 trees, when combined in the proper manner, make very clear what it is that we're actually talking about here. And there's various terms that have been used, right? There's various terms that have been used as far as the idea of the radiance of the Sephiroth and the idea of the husk. One is bestowing endlessly, and one is attempting to and is being blocked. And another way to put that is his conversation with the Holy Guardian Angel is blocked by the abyss. And why 7? If it's a lower world, shouldn't it have its own 10? Well, consider the fact, this is my opinion, is that the lower world does not have a supernal triad. It only has a reflection of the 7 below the abyss. So you have the 3 on top, the 7 that complete the top 10 of or the first 10 of the lower tree, and then the lower tree where Lilith crawls is only 7. And if you consider that, like in the idea of this is Lilith in the Thoth tarot. That's the 7-headed beast that she rides. Okay, these are the 7 dark Sephiroth And what is a dark Sephiroth but a Qliphoth? Okay. The word Qliphoth refers to Lilith now, and we're going to review that in a moment when we get to the Gematria. Okay. And so, I'm just going to pause really quickly and just ask if anybody has any questions about what I talked about and catch up on the stream or on the chat. And first, how's the audio? Because I had to kind of reset mic stuff, and I don't know if the level's decent compared to the music, if it's too loud or too low, so let me know. Let's kind of take a look at the chat real quick. I'm going to look up Corinthians 13:4 real quick in the meantime. Horoscopes connected with the Bible? Oh yeah, absolutely. You think it's an accident that there's 12 disciples? Okay, great. I'm glad. Thank you. Thank you for everybody. Yeah, I might have been lemurs. Sure, I definitely was a. It does kind of look like it was something with a tail, right? Yeah, if it doesn't have a tail, it's not a monkey. Even if it has a monkey kind of shape. If it doesn't have a tail, it's not a monkey. If it doesn't have a tail, it's not a monkey. It's an ape. So, let's see. 1 Corinthians. Are we looking at 1 Corinthians 13:4? Let's take a look. Let's read it. And then we'll know. The greatest gift. 13, verse 4. Love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself. It's not puffed up. It does not behave rudely. It does not seek its own. It does not provoke. Thinks no evil. Does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth. Bears all things. Believes all things. Hopes all things. Endures all things. Love never fails. That's just great. Good stuff. So, awesome. Thank you for that. The greatest gift. That's cool. 13:4 is nice too, because it's like, 4/4. Which also the 44, the 44th hexagram is Lilith. But that's really cool. Thank you for that. I mean, that's all, again, there's divine feminine all over the place there. It's kind of hard not to see it. Should we look at the Gematria? I wonder what the math says. First, we take it in with our hearts, and then we investigate it later with our minds. All we're talking about is the fact that the story of Adam and Eve is misunderstood, because when you read a chapter back, you read the idea of God created man in his image, man and woman, we created them. And so the actual statement of when man was created, it was actually man and woman at the same time, and Eve was clearly created after another chapter later. So you don't have to follow. It's not about esotericism, it's not about hermeticism, it's just about the idea. And I point to that and read it so that you can see that it's evidential, it's empirical. I'm not kind of, and so that's all we're talking about. That's all that actually is. And as far as the tree, that's how the clock works. How to tell time is reading the tarot, and we're going to get there, because the whole point of this is tying it together so we actually have access. Gematria gives us access to. Gematria is a fun way to kind of look into certain subjects from a deeper perspective than we hadn't maybe considered, and can, from that perspective, provide insight, right? Yeah, and the Lilith story really comes down to the idea of willful reception as opposed to blind reception. That there should be a conversation, right? And there's some other deeper symbolism too with respect to the lion-headed serpent and these other things, right? But so let's consider the math. And, I did a few things here. I just took the name Lilith. Okay, and I did the Gematria for the name Lilith, and that's Lamed, Yud, Tau, Lilith, right? Some other examples of Lilith, by the way, just to kind of for fun. There is Lily, right? The name Lily, the name Lilu. I love Lilu. That's just an adorable name. When you think of Lilu, though, you don't think of Lilith, but that's, Liliana, right? Liliana, by the way, for those who, were performing a certain activity in the late 90s related to a card game, know that Liliana is the, the black color. But so that said, that name, wherever you see the lily, that's consider that. There's probably something to that, right? And so the math is essentially 480, which reduces to 12, which reduces to 3, right? And then I did the Temurah, so we took every Lamed became an Aleph, right? Every Yud became a Nun, right? And then the Tau, in this particular circumstance, Tau became Samak, right? And so that it would be pronounced Ananusa, which is Luana, thank you for popping in. And so Ananusa is the Temurah of Lilith, the opposite spoken, right? And that is, so Aleph Nun, Samak. And that equals 162, which reduces to 9, right? And so first of all, we can just sort of meditate upon that and take, and that's fine. So now let's just jump to the book. Because, if we're going to do Gematria, then we have to. Now, I also want to reveal, I found an amazing source. There's a book that I need to buy. I found a copy on Amazon, and eventually I'm going to be able to grab it. As soon as I'm able, I'm going to grab it. And it's a Hebrew-English dictionary that I used to have a copy of, and I don't any longer, that I need to replace. But in the meantime, I found an amazing online resource that's like 777 on steroids with respect to Gematria, finding other words with the same numerical value. Clearly, this book was designed for a certain work and was the beginning. There's much more than 2 or 3 words related to the number 261, right? And so I'm going to share that resource tonight as well. And it's a great way to go through this process. We're going to use this tonight, but that resource I'm going to be using in the future is very valuable. And so I'll be sharing it with you guys tonight here in a moment. But so as far as the math here, the name Lilith equals 480. Okay. And so let's just take a look at 480. Right. And so the first thing I like to do is to take a look at the prime idea. Like, is 480 a prime? Right. Now we know that 480 is an even number, so immediately it's a no, right? And the second thing we're going to look at is the number itself, 480. Okay. And so we have Lilith, the Qliphoth of Malkuth. So basically Malkuth, which is the only actually physically manifested of the Sephiroth. Everything else is unmanifest, right? Number 10 on the bottom is the only one that's actually physically manifest. And so that idea on the bottom there, that 10, is the only one that's physically real. Now the name of that in the dark world, which is essentially the tree of death, is the idea of the Qliphoth, okay? And so that's what this is. And it's also the 72-fold name. So basically, there's another method of deriving the name that's unspeakable. There's the 72 one, there's the 42 one. There's various. There's the 22, right? The 26. Anyway, and it mentioned before, as I had let me read it exactly so that I'm not... we are equal to each other inasmuch as we were both created from the earth. But they would not listen to one another, and when Lilith saw this, she pronounced the ineffable name and flew away into the air. Okay? And so that's the idea. That's the word she spoke, the 42-fold name. Okay? And now there's some other words in here, Lilith, the Qliphoth, and there's some other prayers and so forth. But basically, her name refers to the husk as opposed to radiant. So the idea of the block, the wanting to bestow, but being rejected, and the lament of that. And now let's look at the other name, right? So the other name, this is the Temurah, and Temurah, we just replaced the letters based on that chart on the top there. So every A became an L, right, and so forth. And that's 162. Okay. I am stretching, but 162 is basically phi times 100. But so, and that's a point I happen to throw out there. 162 is phi, 1.618 times 100. So 162. Okay. There we go. The son of the right hand. The angel ruling Scorpio. That's just beautiful. The day demon of basically Sagittarius. But long story short, what we have here is also 14 plus 15 plus 16 plus 17 plus 18, so on until 22. Okay. That appears right here. Okay. 14 plus 15 plus 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21 plus 22 will give you 162. Right. Just an interesting point that they decided to call it that. But so you'll see that there's this idea between these two words here that the... let me jump back there. I should have kept that open. Pardon. There you go. The idea of Scorpio... and the idea of the son of the right hand. Okay. Well, let's not get too hung up on gender as far as what right hand and left hand means. We'll talk about that in a moment. We've all heard about the left hand path, or I get all the time that people ask, like, what do you think about the left hand path and shadow work? And then when I actually speak about it, it's kind of fun to watch the reaction, because it's not what people think, but once you know it, it actually gives you real access, right? It's not just stories. It's not just interesting stuff to talk about because it's spooky. No, it actually gives you access to power, like real power here in the world. And how? By understanding your relationship with her, getting to know Lilith. She exists in a constant state of the desire to bestow and is being rejected, is unable to get past that blockage, right? And so it's that lower tree idea. And so, the Gematria, when we consider the idea here as well of the theosophical reductions, from 12 to 9, and consider what that means. The idea of 3 to 9 and what that means. Because what do we have in the 3? The High Priestess. What do we have in the 9? Right? And consider that option. It's sort of like this, it's kind of the idea of being stuck, right? A lot of people consider this idea, like, for instance, of balance being related to the scales moving, but it really is the idea of wanting everything to be still, this stillness. The Chariot's a different concept related to that as well. They're kind of two sides of that same coin, just one's trying to tip the scale, and one's trying to, keep it even at the same time, and then there's that one in the middle. But at the end of the day, who is she really? I mean, if we keep talking about this story here, about basically the evidence is showing that Adam and Lilith were created together as two sides of the same coin. And then that, because of that, there was this argument of equality. And it's the same message that was delivered to Eve. Eat from this tree and you'll be equal with God. Who was the serpent that talked Eve into this process? The serpent was Lilith. Right? I mean, it all makes sense. Once she left the story, we don't see her again in her form that we're used to hearing about, which was this like other side of Adam. She appears as the serpent. She appears as also, due to the fact that we hear, or that she's the desire, we hear about the serpent being referred to as the Kundalini, the sexual energy, the part of us that is responsible for creating the fuel for desire, right, and to extend our will. There's this idea of the truth. In order to maintain the integrity of this work here, what are we trying to do? What is the real story here? So what I'm going to do is just take a quick minute, step away for a moment, heat up my coffee. I don't know if you guys knew, but I like my coffee on the dark side. That's what we're talking about tonight. So I took out my dark side cup. We're going into the other abyss, the other side, the tree of death. Careful, it's dark down there. It's okay, I'll hold your hand. We'll walk in together. That being said, I need just a couple minutes to heat some stuff up, and I will be right back. Stick around. We're going to have some fun. Alrighty. So, here's the beauty, Emma. The beauty of knowing the one truth is recognizing that the story's already written and we know the end because we lived it already. Okay, and so the fact is that there is no hell. What we're doing now is we're using the idea of the power of mythology to tell the story and to provide context to things that are much greater than our little minds can understand. And so rather than constantly search for the answer, we approach it from the idea of truth. And when we do that, we can see the truth in the story. The story presented in the books, the story presented in the movies, the story presented in the world around us. Our soul is always talking, right? The story presented in our religion and in the tarot. Why does the tarot work? Why can we lay these cards out and tell the future? Because we're not telling the future. We're recalling the past. We already lived it. And so we can see the story in the cards. And that's all we're doing here. We're looking at all these different places where we can see that same story. And we tell it every different way that we can so that it sinks in what's actually being said. We can't hear the voice of our soul with our ears. We can only hear it in our hearts. And so we take the information in emotionally. We feel it. Feel that knowing. And what is that knowing? That the story we've been told is only half the story. Right? And so that's what we're going to be talking about right now. We're going to be speaking about this idea that there's more to the story. Maybe we've been only told half. We've been told this whole time that we're the observer. And that's half true. The true story is that we're the one being observed. When we are in the state of listening, all we hear is our own voice. So let's take a look at that. Let's consider what we're talking about here. Okay. Notice I have my my dark wand tonight. Right. Some of you may be familiar with the dark wand. Right. This is the weapon of the dark side. Right. Very interesting and apropos symbol, I thought. What we're looking at here is the idea of there being every two has a third. Right? That's the algorithm, the divine algorithm that allows us to unlock the story if we know how to use it. And so what we're talking about is a part of this that I haven't really talked about too much, and that's this other card. This one where the bottom looks very similar to what we're used to, but it's a little different and it's almost barren. I mean, consider what this looks like. Look at the life. Right? We have the divine will raining down upon us. We have the divine mind in our hearts overflowing. We have divine love washing clean our mind. And we share divine body. But then there's this other place where the lower world is barren and the upper world, is attempting to speak but won't be heard. It's being rejected. It wants to bestow but is told no. It's like there's this whole second story. It's almost as if there's a third world and we're kind of in between these two. And do we reject or do we receive? Is it bestowing or is it lamenting due to the rejection? This is Lilith. This is us. This is us. So you get the idea here. What we're really referring to is this concept that this is the tree that we are in the midst of transversing right now as we speak. The actual tree itself is more than one tree. Okay, that's what we're really talking about here. And so what we're really referring to is this concept that there's an upper and a lower. And there's even a lower in the lower. There's this idea of every two having a three. And so the physically manifest world always manifests as a duality. And so why do we look around our world and think that there isn't a reflection? This is the idea of the importance of doing the work. It's the importance of, when you hear the term shadow work, you recognize what that's actually referring to. And what it's referring to is not this concept of dark entities, although it's dark entities. And we talked about that a little bit yesterday, what that really means. Because it's an important component of this whole process of waking up and understanding the truth, right? And so when we consider what we're talking